Record of Ragnarok, the final tournament of humanity against the gods, placing the greatest men of all time against the most bloodthirsty deities in hopes of deciding the fate of mankind as a whole. Shuumatsu no Valkyrie is home to some of the greatest fights I've ever personally read, and you guys seem to enjoy my stream talking about all the fights in the series, so this is gonna serve as one big condensed summary and review of every fight in the series, ranking them in order from worst to best, based on score points of character, choreography, impact, and overall hype in general. If you've been enjoying Record of Ragnarok from the beginning, or just want to hear about some fun manga battles and you've never even read Record of Ragnarok, hit that like button and let's just get right into it. But first, this video is sponsored by me. I don't need to give you guys the full spiel. You already know I'm a full-time content creator and I need to keep the lights on. If you enjoy my content and want to keep seeing more of it, please consider showing your support by becoming a member of the channel. $1 is all it takes to be a member, and it gets you instant access to the community Discord where we all hang out and keep discussions going after lives or uploads. And if you join the $5 tier, you also get access to exclusive streams on Wednesdays. Also, if you want more anime manga content in general, just check out my second channel where I cover all the weekly series you may or may not read, as well as post and stream extra content like tier lists and other fun stuff. I'll also have a third channel, annoying, I know, but this is where all the gameplay and stream highlights are going to go for the future in case you missed something. So just know that I love you guys and I appreciate all the support you give. Let's get back to the video.
I have a message for you from the future!
Alright, so I actually planned on releasing this video a long time ago, but by the time it was finished, this fight was just about to end, and I figured I would wait, and boy, oh boy, am I glad I did. Because I'll be 100% honest, for a battle that involved Loki, a god that has been teased and heavily mixed into the main plot of Ragnarok, it might just take the cake for the most disappointing round of the tournament. The trickster god did not deliver on his years of aura farming and crap talking, and ultimately was low diffed by a newly introduced champion. Although to be fair, Simo might be one of the coolest humans on Brunhild's roster, and when she said she specifically saved the one participant best suited for Loki, who knew how right she would actually be? For starters, I will say I didn't mind the newly developing love triangle between Loki, Brunhild, and Siegfried at first. And the reason I stressed that I didn't mind it at first is because while I felt it started off making Loki feel like a three-dimensional character with flaws, these motivations and unreciprocated love vows by the end of the fight just make Loki seem as immature as he kind of always came off. While that's not exactly unfitting for the trickster god, now that Loki's story is over, his only real designation as a character is cocky, arrogant bully, especially as the talkative, overzealous, and dramatic fighter going up against the quiet and stoic White Death, who despite saying little, steals the show entirely throughout the whole battle. Not only was Simo able to make every single one of his shots count, a tribute to his historical contribution to the world, defending Finland from the Soviet Union, it served to make every trick and trap Loki laid feel pointless, as if Simo's marksmanship shattered every one of Loki's illusions into pieces due to actively wearing his suffering on his sleeve, where Loki hides it deep down inside, even at the very end. The way Simo's backstory, while a bit different from the actual historical account, manages to accurately portray the legendary picture that the White Death had probably painted into the minds of every Finnish and Soviet soldier in the Winter War, is really one of the only good things about this battle, because to be honest, Loki's is pretty lackluster, only making the trickster god seem more like a flat, one-dimensional incel. And I don't use that term lightly. Loki's whole personality was a facade, acting cold and mean to embrace his outcast punk nature, while all the others cowered in fear simply because, you know, he was stronger than everyone else in the pantheon. That's the only reason he was able to get away with it. The moment Loki found a girl he likes, he completely switches up everything about himself and becomes the goofy class clown. But like most funny guys learn, you need to have an actual personality for women to like you, because while Loki was making Brunhild laugh, Siegfried was making her swoon, blush, and fall in love. Things that Loki clearly would never understand. Which is not only the exact reason why Brunhild and Loki would never have gotten together in the first place, since Loki didn't actually give a shit about Brunhild and simply liked the idea of who she was. When jokes didn't get him into her heart, Loki immediately ripped away Brunhild's happiness without a second thought, making him a selfish, inconsiderate prick who thought he deserved a woman's love despite doing nothing to deserve it. And when he gets rejected, he lashes out like a child who says if he can't have his favorite toy, then no one else can. And that's the long version, but the short version is, like I said, incel. And the fact that this ultimately ended up setting all of the story in motion lacks all of the interesting flaws that I would like Loki to have. And it becomes even more apparent when you put him up against a noble hero like Simo, who only has one flaw, which is his kind of one-noteness. He's a sniper, and that's literally all there is to him. But to be fair, that's all Simo was ever going to be, and I didn't expect much more from him. It really should have been up to the trickster god to make this fight fun and have good choreography, even though his opponent might mostly be playing hide and seek. But instead, all of Loki's tricks fall short, and not just because Simo instantly decimates them, but more so because they're really not all that well thought out or complex. Loki just ends up relying on the raw presence of other gods like Heracles, Thor, and Odin, spending most of the battle just making clones of them and sending them out to do his bidding instead of actually getting involved himself. While being able to make clones of himself, copy anything he touches and recreate it, use his special ring to make those clones infinitely, as well as swap his core essence between any of these clones, all of these techniques are super strong, and any intelligent character would be able to use them in very in-depth layered strategies, yet none of these abilities are used in a clever way. Even Loki's final trick that the mangaka tries to use the shonen trope of having another smart character explain alongside a glass of tea just kind of feels underwhelming. And Simo just sees right through it, making the fight feel less of a back and forth and more like Loki's emotional dumping ground as he tries and fails to get one over on the character he set up victory for by choosing the perfect arena for him. I mean, like, it feels intentional almost. If Loki chose a normal arena or even decided to fight close quarters, his tricks could have been used in so many more fun and probably effective ways. The very last soul swap Loki does when he changes places with a bird that was above Simo could have been like such an effective tactic if he used it earlier. Like, imagine instead of a whole field of Thors and Odins, Loki actually used all of the animals in the area to confuse and attack Simo's blind spots. A literal flock of simple birds and rabbits would have been more effective in this fight than Loki mass producing the gods. And while, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a lame analysis to say Loki might have just been dumbed down on purpose to make sure Simo won, I don't think it's controversial to say, compared to the other tactical and strategic rounds that we've already gotten in this fight that I'll cover later on, this fight leaves a lot to be desired. Loki being at a disadvantage because he chose his opponent's best environment and then being surprised Simo could actually take it to his advantage just does not speak trickster god to me. Loki claims to have chosen this arena to benefit his own tricks, but that is never shown whatsoever in any of the plans he makes, even if that was meant to be the intention. And the worst part is, since Simo was just trading his organs for bullets the whole fight, all Loki really had to do was outlast Simo to win. Instead, this fight just feels like an afterthought, but at least the character dynamics kind of make sense. Loki is a god who was never truly once himself, only being happy deluding himself into believing a woman's smile was all he needed, ruthlessly outmatched, outplayed, and gunned down by a noble, legendary warrior who wore his suffering on his sleeve, devoting his literal life force to his bullets to atone for the pain he inflicted. While Simo Haya will probably go down as one of the coolest aura farmers in Ragnarok, Loki's reputation is forever stained with probably what is going to be the worst fight in the whole series. Apollo vs. Leonidas is the very first ranked match on our list, and it is pretty widely accepted as the worst fight in Record of Ragnarok, so this shouldn't be too controversial of a pick. Despite this fight having a large amount of potential and setup, what with King Leonidas having a personal grudge with the sun god Apollo, and Leonidas being considered to be one of the strongest fighters on humanity's roster, it falls flat for multiple reasons. The background of this fight works perfectly as the foundation. Leonidas, the legendary king king of Sparta and the strongest rebel in history, is infamous for leading a charge of 300 Spartans against the Persians in the Battle of Thermopylae. However, it's well known Sparta was unable to maximize its military prowess due to the sun god's oracle not believing in Leonidas' war plans, thus reducing the king's army down to only his most loyal followers. As the world's greatest rebel, Leonidas believed he could reject the gods and live his own way, taking him and his men to their death and selfishly asserting his individuality all the way to the end. Now having the chance to avenge his death in the 9th round of Ragnarok, taking on the very god that got in Leonidas' way, it's more than enough of a motivational backstory to put some respect on the king's name. However, the problem is there isn't a single moment where Leonidas lives up to that name or supposed ferocity throughout this whole fight. The sun god Apollo, his opponent, steals the show from Leonidas at every possible opportunity, and never once does this fight seem like the scale or momentum might tip in Leonidas' favor. Apollo, as the 4th Greek god to step into the ring, is already facing a losing battle of oversaturation for one tribe of deities, and the fact that his opponent's reason for fighting ultimately surpasses Apollo's own, which is out of a pure narcissistic passion for the beauty that's found in fighting, Apollo is the perfect god for a rebel like Leonidas to, as he would put it, take down a peg. Similar to Poseidon, Apollo represents the cruel and unjust oppression the gods put upon humanity, and all of the narcissistic self-importance that comes with it. However, unlike Poseidon, Apollo has something that the sea god did not, and it's enough to propel him so far in this fight it actually gets him the win. That is Apollo's charisma. Leonidas' Volunder, his weapon imbued with the power of the Valkyrie that allows humans to even contend with gods in the first place, is ultimately pretty lackluster. While sure, a shield's a perfect fit for Leonidas, he never really has any cool attacks or techniques with it, and the most we get out of a transformation is that it releases a chain and large metal ball to makeshift as a hammer. Meanwhile, for the entire fight, it almost seems like Apollo's in complete control, and the amount of amazing art and cool panels that he gets seems to agree. From the beginning, Apollo was introduced as the boxing god, and combined with his threads of Artemis that allow Apollo to either manipulate the threads to create powerful weapons or interfere with his opponent's movements, the sun god is unmatched compared to King Leonidas. The first half of the fight is actually interrupted because Apollo's wailing on him so easily, the god's boxing footwork and counterattacks start making the audience chatter about this being an unfair fight, making Apollo change up his fighting stance completely and make the fight as close quarters as possible so he can't overwhelm Leonidas. I mean, come on, what an embarrassing moment for humanity's strongest rebel. Add in the fact that Apollo's divine weapon, Moonlight of Artemis, is able to create his ultimate attacks with a unique golden bow, launching arrows of actual light itself that are invisible to the human eye. Apollo just releases whole volleys of these light arrows that pierce multiple donut holes in Leonidas' body, and the sun god can even use himself as the final silver arrow, revealing his desperation technique Argyrotoxos, an attack so strong it shatters Leonidas' Volunder and dealt the finishing blow all in one shot. I'll be honest, if Apollo wasn't so fun to watch, this fight would be worse than it already is, and considering it's already bottom of the list, that is insane to think about. Look, let me start this ranking off by explaining that Buddha as a character is one of my favorites out of everyone in the Record of Ragnarok series. From his introduction as the lackadaisical yet extremely wise and threatening representation of the original Buddha, above heaven and earth, he alone is the honored one, Buddha's backstory of being a prince that was going to be promised an entire empire, yet after the loss of his best friend, Buddha realized that all of the world's material possessions and attachments are merely holding him back from achieving his full potential and ultimately living his best enlightened life. In rejection of tradition, cultural norms, social contracts, and any and all existing philosophy or religion, Buddha achieved enlightenment by chasing what he himself truly believed was righteous and pure, saving people because he wanted to, relaxing and meditating because he wanted to, choosing to follow and ignore whatever divine guidance or wisdom was disseminated amongst the public as he saw fit because he wanted to, ultimately creating a lifestyle that resulted in Buddha becoming one of the most respected monks and eventually deities of all time, ascending past humanity, but all the while never once taking the god side in the great Ragnarok. Buddha is the reason Volunder, the synchronization between two souls, Valkyrie and human, is possible, gifting mankind the power they needed to contend with the gods in the first place. And even now, after Buddha's already fought in the tournament, he remains as a relevant character, acting as a significant force of opposition to Odin and the latter's plan to release the primordial gods to take over heaven. That being said, Instead, Buddha is not enough to save the absolute drag of a fight that is Ragnarok Round 6. And that's of no fault of his own. Mostly, it's all on his opponents Zerofuku and Heija. Now, this might sound harsh, but Zerofuku is just not a fun or even really interesting character to watch. And that's not because his character backstory isn't written well or it doesn't make sense. The idea of the god of misfortune originally being a deity of innocence and peace, setting out to absolve humanity of their sins and eventually becoming corrupted due to mankind's inability to grow past its flaws, is, in my opinion, a poetic and real tale, especially when you consider that no matter how hard Zerofuku tried to work, it seemed like society would never change and honestly only really ever got worse. Yet out of nowhere, in almost no time at all, here's this random human calling himself Buddha that's able to relieve people of their sins and despair through just the practices of his enlightenment. The original, untainted Zerofuku might have been more than willing to share the spotlight with Buddha. However, this aged, worn, and beaten down god became so selfish and envious, he was forced to split himself into 7 pieces before Zerofuku could go too far. Now, recombined and able to take its revenge on the man who caused his downward spiral, you would think Zerofuku would bring the exact kind of opposition or be a foil to the character Buddha needs. Unfortunately, like Leonidas before, Zerofuku's actual personality and show on display misses the mark entirely and ends up just being a grating experience to read through. The idea of Zerofuku's main issue being his adolescence, his immaturity, and just quite literally teenage angst, while believable, is just kind of annoying to see. Instead of having any real decent back and forth dialogue with the wise and fun quippy Buddha, Zerofuku's discussion mostly surrounds how miserable he is and how much he can't stand Buddha and is upset about how serious his situation is. Every line of dialogue is just Zerofuku complaining and whinging while his weapon gets bigger and more intricate. It leaves a great character like Buddha with little to bounce off of, resulting in a pretty boring and what feels like a very long-paced low diff. Buddha is just casually defending, countering, or dodging, and this just leads to more crying and whinging from Zerofuku, and the chapters kind of just cycle back and forth around that until he's eventually replaced by Heijin, the demon lord of the 6th hell who was sealed within Zerofuku. Buddha's enlightenment powers are exciting and fun to see, don't get me wrong. His pure enlightenment 8th consciousness, which allows him to look into a being's soul and gain precognition, and the 6 realm staff that changes weaponry based on the emotions Buddha's currently feeling, are all interesting stakes to the fight and fitting for a character like Buddha. When Heijin's introduced, I'll admit the battle does become a little bit better, actually becoming an actual war for supremacy when Buddha begins to struggle, and as a first-time reader, when Heijin swaps out, it can be a little jarring, but the stakes of the fight increase tremendously because after the low diff that was Zerofuku, Heijin might actually have the potential to defeat Buddha. As one of the most powerful demons in all of existence, Heijin has the power to shatter divine weapons by using his own limbs as a blade. He transformed his arm into a humongous drill to pierce through Buddha's Amhisa shield and shattered the Salakaya scythe with his blaze of glory. And because of Heijin's dark spirit, the entire fight Buddha is unable to read into Heijin's moves, which eliminate all the handicaps Buddha previously had and make it a very true battle to the death, only eventually overcoming those odds when Buddha conjures his own Volunder with the former spirit of Zerofuku, the god of misfortune, finally accepting Buddha and deciding to work together. Their fusion of souls create a great Nirvana sword, just powerful enough to cut Heijin into pieces and inspire fear in the demon lord's heart, letting Buddha look into the light of his soul and win the fight. While this does become an impactful battle towards the end, as a whole experience, it's terrible in my honest opinion throughout the first half and just boring. The more exciting and unexpected second half does not make up for the first. This might be my most controversial pick, and I want to start it off by saying that both participants in this fight, Hades, King of the Netherworld, and Qin Shi Huang, First Emperor of China, are great characters with intriguing backstories that end up not only winning each other over by the end of the battle, but winning my heart as well. There is just something about this fight though, for me, that feels a little lacking, and if I had to be honest, I think it's primarily in the choreography of how Hades and Qin don't really have much fight chemistry. Hades, as a character, works perfectly fine for the role he needs to fill within the Greek pantheon. The god of the underworld, Hades is a ferocious deity supposed to rival Poseidon and even Zeus, as he himself is the eldest brother of the Greek siblings. As an older brother myself, I genuinely am a sucker for tropes that Hades fills. That of being the calm, resourceful older sibling and having the backstory during the Gigantomachy of him single-handedly defending Helheim so so his younger siblings don't have to worry about protecting Valhalla with stress. It genuinely was an inspiring and really relatable tale. Characters like Choso from Jujutsu Kaisen or Finral from Black Clover really hit home for me, so Hades is no different. That being said, when it comes to Hades' character design, it does feel a little uninspired to me. Obviously, as siblings, Hades is meant to look like Poseidon's older brother, the god Hades is shown to have the most familial bond with. However, when considering the creativity of what the mangaka was able to do with Zeus, even their forgotten brother Adamus, it makes Hades feel a little boring in comparison. Here you've got the king of the underworld, lord of the dead, invisible helmet wearing, Demeter and Persephone kidnapping, Greek god of the underworld Hades. And all we got was Poseidon, but instead of torrential downpours or extreme speed stabs, Hades just uses his superior physical strength to launch shockwaves with his bident thrusts, or combines his earth-shattering power with the Pluto Ichor, the special substance within Hades' blood to further amplify his dominance. It's just a very less exciting moveset compared to Qin Shi Huang, whose fighting techniques appear to be so dynamic and full of potential for what could have been a very fun back and forth melee battle, using a 5-pointed star with each end representing a different tool of war that the great demon god Chi Yu birthed. Qin Shi Huang can rotate between armor style, which absorbs an attack's energy and allows Qin to redirect the power as a counterattack, spear or sword forms, which act as empowered strikes for Qin's bare hands or the sword he uses as a volunder, and most valuably, the crossbow form, the secret ability of Chi Yu that fires an invisible air bullet and upon making contact with a person's ki, severely weakens that chakra point and can dampen an opponent's attack power. With an acrobatic and quick-moving person like Qin, someone that even without a volunder could embarrass the god of war Ares with his bare hands and destroy multiple walls of Valhalla, I think it might have been cooler if Qin went up against someone that had a little bit more fighting range than just strong thrust techniques. Like, it's kind of funny because I enjoy Qin's backstory as well, him being the cursed emperor who was forced to bear the pain of his people around him, inadvertently synchronizing with their ki through sight and empathetically sharing their burdens, only learning to stop worrying about making up for his sins when his foster mother sacrifices herself for him, making the promise to her to become the greatest king that ever lived. Watching Qin Shi Huang and Hades eventually come to appreciate one another's leadership and gain a mutual respect of one another's kingdoms, perhaps they could have been great friends. Isn't that what Record of Ragnarok is all about? Humans proving they're able to ascend to the level of the gods themselves, and the gods that believe their place is above us, realizing that dominance might have been taken for granted. Overall, I genuinely do like this fight and everything that it stands for, but as an actual fight, I've gotta rank it pretty low because that's honestly the worst thing about this round. As the very first one-on-one fight between humans and gods in the tournament of Ragnarok, Thor and Lu Bu accomplishes everything it sets out to do of setting the stage for, quite honestly, the entire series of Shuumatsu no Valkyrie. Wholeheartedly speaking, the only flaw this fight suffers from is the obvious truth that Record of Ragnarok only gets better from here on. Thor vs. Lu Bu as a whole is such a great opening fight for the sole purpose it paints the perfect picture for the rest of what Record of Ragnarok is standing for. In the very first scene of the series, the gods are so apathetic to the extermination of humanity, the verdict of mankind's extinction is reached in a mere lapse of 2 to 5 minutes. Were it not for Brunhild and the Valkyries spiting the gods, taunting them into the tournament, the Council of Deities would not have wasted another second on the entire population of humans. And in the very first battles of Ragnarok, that ignorance of the gods is on full display. At first, believing this event was nothing more than a fleeting joke in their everlasting eternities. However, when Thor and Lu Bu actually clash, in just 16 minutes and 28 seconds, both fighters are able to achieve something that neither of them would have ever been able to had these two beings never crossed paths. Thor, god of thunder, is portrayed in Record of Ragnarok as a cold, unforgiving god, stated to be the strongest warrior amongst all of the Norse pantheon. Thor's backstory is one of horror, absolute power, and most of all, nihilistic depression. During an attack on Asgard by the Jotnar, an evil race of giants directly opposed to the Nordic gods in their lore, the creatures organized an all-out war on Asgard and were only moments away from conquering the entire city before Thor single-handedly obliterated the entire horde of 66 giants without breaking a sweat. The Jotnar invasion would have left any warrior traumatized. However, Thor, in his hubris, was found amongst the carnage and raining blood, staring at the sky and being board. The most catastrophic attack on Thor's homeland in history couldn't even give him a challenge. Likewise, Lubu, the flying general, renowned as the strongest warlord in all three kingdoms of ancient China, was never able to reach satisfaction in his own short human life. Whether Lubu fought other legendary combatants, entire armies of war, or even bears and ferocious animals, he could never once meet his match. Throughout all his time on Earth, Lubu honed his skills and body to conquer everything in his path, to the point he even became capable of splitting the sky itself for several miles just from the raw force of Lubu's halberd swings. This indomitable strength made him unbeatable, which ultimately resulted in a massive depression towards the end of his life, realizing Lubu may never get the chance to use all of this power he's amassed. Eventually being captured and executed out of pure boredom, for a life without challenge was a life not worth living. These two warriors, who were never able to meet their match in their average lifetimes, would find kinship in one another during this first sacred battle of Ragnarok. Thor's Mjolnir awakening from its slumber and revealing the technique he used to defeat the world serpent Jomungandr, Geirrod, an attack that instantly killed the beast. Meanwhile, Lubu is able to survive this blow and even match Thor's colossal aura with his own ultimate technique, Sky Eater, the ability Lubu never thought he'd be able to use in his lifetime. When Lubu continues to stand against the god of thunder, and humanity for the very first time cheers in earnest, when at first Ragnarok seemed hopeless, just as Thor for the very first time in all of heaven shows a smile, exposing his true bloodlusted self, and when he honors Lubu in death by sending all of his followers to the grave alongside him, inspiring Thor to even stand against Odin, the head Norse god, during his short conflict with Buddha, in efforts to honor all of the other warriors of Ragnarok and let the tournament continue fairly. Despite being humanity's first loss, Lubu's will pushed us forward into the next fight and showed us mankind might actually have a chance. The ripples of this battle are even felt on the god's side. Most of them left stunned Lubu could even put up a good fight against the heaven's mightiest warrior, which is just chef's kiss on capturing the entire essence of your series in one quick cinematic back and forth. It's a shame some of these other fights really do hit that much harder. This pick is specifically why I think Kin vs. Hades ranking is going to be controversial, because I know this is the less appreciated fight between the two of these in the community. But hear me out, because I generally would have agreed with you if it wasn't for my second read through of the series, where I came out of this experience with a much bigger appreciation for this fight. This battle primarily revolves around the theme of legacy and how sometimes great people, be they gods or even men, live their lives not for themselves, but for the others that look up to them, and most importantly, the ones that will come after. Whether this be through Shiva's eventual conquering of Svarga and uniting the 1,116 Hindu gods under his singular reign, something that no deva had ever been able to do before, or Raiden Tamimon representing the burning fiery passion that exists within the sport of sumo as the peerless Rikishi and the strongest Japanese sumo wrestler of all time, fighting to not only save humanity itself, but using every technique and mastery of the sumo world ingrained into his colossal muscles to prove the very thing that every other Rikishi in history already knows, that Raiden Tamimon exemplifies all that is sumo. No matter how many trials and tribulations our fighters are met with, be it in the battle itself or their backstories, these noble leaders each prove they fight with their hearts, as both Raiden and Shiva fight to the death, continually standing up despite getting put down over and over, not because they themselves want to win for some kind of selfish reason, but because all the people that look up to them are depending on their victory, as a testament to not what they themselves are, but what they represent. And what each character represents is shown to us through their respective flashbacks. Shiva, during his pilgrimage with his best friend Rudra, despite originally being lazy and just wanting to be a simple deva of dancing, ends up tackling all of Svarga with Rudra and fighting to reach their land's peak. Shiva was content to share the peak of Svarga with his friend Rudra. However, his brother-in-arms knew the cold-hearted truth of what needed to be done once the two partners reached the top. As the two remaining devas battled for supremacy, the younger Shiva tried to take the fall and just give Rudra the victory to make everyone happy. However, this is a disrespect to his friend, who teaches Shiva the lesson that if Shiva refuses to give his all in a fight, he's spitting in the face of every god they defeated to get to this peak. They are all united under Shiva, just as much as they were Rudra. And if Shiva can't see that, he's only shaming them, not himself. Which means, despite every critical injury Raiden Raiden inflicts on Shiva, ripped off arms, bleeding from every orifice, even causing the god of destruction to achieve his ultimate form, the Tandava Karma, said to only emerge when the destruction of the universe is at hand. Shiva is willing to burn everything to cinders, as long as it means he's not holding back against Raiden. Likewise, Raiden carries all of Sumo's history on his back as the peerless Rikishi, unable to give up either. While his debt to Sumo is nowhere near as deep as Shiva's may be to the entire Hindu pantheon, throughout Raiden's backstory is a man who was cursed with so much strength it caused his own bones to crack and bend as a child. Yet when his village was on the brink of famine and too poor to escape its fate, the pacifist child, who vowed to never use his superhuman strength to hurt another, set out to help his people the only way he knew how, by turning that curse into a blessing and winning prize money as a sumo wrestler. Over the course of his journey, Raiden is accepted into sumo and steadfastly becomes an undefeated wrestler. However, when he begins to see the look of horror in his opponent's faces, Raiden begins to feel jaded and give up on his talents once more. But just as Shiva learned from Rudra, Raiden was taught a similar lesson. By purposefully losing, Raiden not only dishonors the opponent he enters the ring with, he dishonors all of the people in his hometown that look up to Raiden and rely on his victories to quite literally stay alive in this terrible living situation. As much as Raiden wanted to give up and selfishly turn his back on sumo, he knew his role as a provider and, as the peerless Rikishi, had surpassed even he himself at this point, choosing to continue winning his matches in the name of his home village. While I personally enjoy Shiva's backstory a bit more, the underlying aspect of Raiden's past also plays into his fight with Shiva perfectly. And in a similar vein to Lubu vs Thor, because of Raiden's muscular condition, he was never able to sumo without fear of hurting his opponent, or worse, himself. Yet when realizing Shiva can match Raiden's combat skills at every turn, Raiden finally finds an opportunity to fully express his love for sumo, unveiling his special forbidden form of Teppo Sumo, the Yatagarasu. This is also thanks to his Volunder and Valkyrie partner Thrud, who essentially becomes a muscular exoskeleton for Raiden to support his medical condition and use his body without worry of collapse or breakage. But yeah, I digress. I love this fight. I think if you disagree, you should probably reread it, and if you still don't like it, well, you know what? I'm sure there's other rankings we can agree on. Humanity's very first win coming from mankind's strongest loser is just the most fitting irony and the biggest spit in the face to the gods, especially considering Poseidon, king of the seas, the most fearsome god and a deity without a single shred of love for humanity, is the one that falls in this round of Ragnarok. It's just kind of poetic justice that rockets this fight up the ranking for me, because personally, I think there couldn't have been a more fitting way to carve out man's first win. Poseidon, as a whole, lacks a lot of personality, so he does come off pretty bland compared to most of the other gods. However, this does not make him a bad character by any means. In fact, it's completely by design, as he serves his role as the first god to be defeated. Poseidon is supposed to be a representation of what the typical god is: a cold, uncaring, and condescending deity that wouldn't lift a finger to do something that wouldn't serve his own interests. Unlike the previous fighters that could see the greatness in their opponents, Poseidon sees humans as lesser beings, quite literally insects beneath Poseidon's feet. The king of the sea's backstory even shows he considers his own kind lesser beings, proven when Poseidon slaughters his own brother Adamus without hesitation, making Adamus realize his own brother had never once in their entire lives looked him in the eyes. Not even as Poseidon dealt a killing blow was Adamus worth a single glance or consideration. While Poseidon obviously had some respect for the more powerful gods like his older brother Hades and assumedly Zeus, the sea god exemplifies everything a cruel, heartless god would be seen as, which makes his defeat all the more satisfying. Because unlike Poseidon, someone who was lucky enough to be born a god in a universe where like 99.99999% of existence are never gonna be as fortunate as him, Sasaki Kojiro, the world's strongest loser, has gained his strength from constant perseverance and that human trait that is wholeheartedly absent in Poseidon's heart: drive. Even in his first life, Sasaki Kojiro was always known as a slacker, never taking tradition or common sense too seriously. However, what Sasaki did hyper-focus on was imagination training, watching some of the best swordsmen of his time duel to their heart's content, fight, and after losing to their sword and escaping with his life, Sasaki would return to solitude, using his body, mind, and soul to replay those battle experiences over and over again before him, as if Sasaki himself was reliving these fights, repeating this process endlessly until Sasaki was strong enough to conquer that vision and move on to a new challenge. Sasaki never sought fame or fortune. Only the warriors he surpassed would eventually acknowledge Sasaki's way of the sword, which resulted in Sasaki Kojiro's peak form being his oldest possible state after his death and final battle with Musashi Miyamoto. In the afterlife, Sasaki had endless time to continually fight Musashi and grow, eventually developing the dual-wielded Ninten Ganryu style that ultimately ends up providing Sasaki with the winning combo against Poseidon, taking every swordmaster Sasaki had ever bested into account and utilizing every aspect of their fighting styles to overcome the gods themselves. This fight is one of my favorites because it's a classic tale of human perseverance. With every single almost impossible to dodge torrent of stabs Poseidon launches with his trident, the deep trenches of the sea swallow Sasaki into their darkest abyss. Yet thanks to every human connection he's ever made, Sasaki becomes inspired to develop his swordsmanship past the level of God. And the core aspect of Sasaki's imagination training takes shape through his ability to play out combat scenarios in his head to find the best escape and counterattack route through Poseidon's indomitable floods. It is definitely the first step into the upper echelon of Record of Ragnarok's best battles. Everyone knew this fight was coming eventually, and honestly, I struggled not putting this in the top 3, but I hope you guys will all agree with me on these higher ranks. For how memorable and classic the second round of Ragnarok is, hopefully everyone agrees with me that while this is a legendary encounter, it is just a taste of how great the series can be. Adam, the first man, versus Zeus, godfather of the cosmos. Some might say the final battle of Ragnarok came early with this one, because not only is Zeus one of, if not the strongest god in all of heaven, Adam is considered to be the very peak of what humanity can offer in fighters as well. And once again, this tournament round ends with its victor coming to find an appreciation for humanity that certainly wasn't there before the battle. Ironically enough, Zeus's and Adam's backstories aren't all that different either, depending on how you look at them. Betrayed by the gods themselves, Adam and his wife Eve were deceived by the great serpent in the Garden of Eden into committing the first sin and eating from the tree of knowledge. But in complete rejection of the god's will, Adam walked into the courtroom, eating an entire basket of apples from the tree of knowledge, declaring if they are to banish Eve, he too no longer needs God's light, becoming the first man in history to not only be born, but the first man to ever stand against the heavens as well. Similarly, Zeus was the first and only child of Kronos to stand against his father and the Titans, battling him over dominion of the heavens, essentially building the Greek pantheon from scratch after Kronos' defeat with his siblings. Both Zeus and Adam represent their species' first rebellion, as well as stand at the top of their respective food chains. And despite having the quote-unquote final boss battle happen in round 2 instead of 13, the impact and stakes of the fight is not lost by any means. The two fighters each showcase a level of power that is yet to be matched by any other round. Zeus with the unfathomable ability to expand his body and muscles, all the while being able to dance around opponents at an extreme, impossible to follow speed, even launching punches or kicks at the speed of light, or according to Zeus's own words, faster than time itself. Not only is Adam able to somehow match Zeus's mind-bending godlike power, he's able to perform all of the exact same skills at an even higher rate. Due to being created in God's image as the very first man, Adam was endowed with the eyes of the Lord, an ocular ability that bestowed Adam with the power to copy any movement he witnesses, even if it's performed by divine beings, giving Adam the potential to surpass the human limit and even recreate reality warping techniques like Zeus's time-transcending fists, all with the same attack potency as the godfather of the cosmos himself. The first man was able to bring out every inch of Zeus's strength in their battle, even transforming Zeus into his desperation form, Adamus. Zeus being forced to bring the copycat into a punching volley of a attrition, knowing that if Adam could just do everything Zeus can better, the only chance of victory was creating a situation where the first person whose body gave out was the loser. And despite his injuries cutting his transformation time in half, to the point his body was even beginning to wither away, Zeus was unfortunately able to outlast Adam's eyes of the Lord, whose strain on his nervous system and brain eventually caused the fighter to die mid-punching barrage. Adam loses to Zeus, standing on his own 2 feet, having died long before the exchange of punches even stopped. The man's corpse was still moving even in death, fighting against God, something that not only made Zeus compliment and pay his respects, but inspired humanity to keep fighting and take fate into their own hands, as Adam may not have won, but his unbreakable will carries mankind even now as Ragnarok enters its final rounds. Everyone knew this fight would make at least the top 3, as I guarantee any real fan of Record of Ragnarok would tell you this battle might genuinely be one of the best fights to come out of manga in the last decade or so. Jack versus Heracles is one of the most iconic tournament rounds in all of Ragnarok, and that stems entirely from the way the 2 participants not only bounce off of each other as characters, working as complete polar opposites, but truthfully, it's because of how much Jack the Ripper steals the show and plays the demigod Heracles like a fiddle for the whole battle. When it comes to Jack the Ripper, one of history's most infamous and prolific serial killers, there is almost a completely blank slate to work with in the means of character development, simply because the original identity of the murderer has never been discovered, which gives the mangaka free rein to transform Jack the Ripper into anything they wanted, which I genuinely feel is a testament to how much the author can build a personality without having any restrictions or guidelines to adhere by. It is no secret Jack the Ripper is one of the most popular participants in the Ragnarok tournament, even long after his fight, round 4 of currently 11, has ended. And that's just due to Jack's charisma and his spin-off manga that I've heard just ruins his character, so maybe not, we won't talk about that. But throughout this fight, Jack is able to appear in total control from beginning to end. Most Ragnarok participants are known for their uncomparable strength, their wit, or like battle accomplishments. But as humanity's most infamous murderer, Jack the Ripper fights Heracles using nothing more than clever schemes, underhanded deceptions, and just outright taking advantage of the demigod's true and honest nature. Brunhild even mentions from the beginning, the moment she knew Heracles was her opponent, the only human that would be able to surpass him was a man who could exploit the demigod's sense of honor. And as a warrior who even earned the respect of the god of war Ares himself, Heracles walks into the tournament expecting a fair fight, and that's exactly what makes Jack the perfect counter. Jack deceives Heracles by drawing on the demigod's politeness, requesting the ordinary tournament arena to be changed to resemble 1800s London, a location where the serial killer would have full advantage, and Jack also lies multiple times about the weaponry he's using in the fight. Originally revealing his Volunder to be a pair of giant scissors, Jack makes Heracles believe his divine weapon was broken when the demigod destroyed it with his club, only to immediately reveal this was not the case when Jack's barrage of knife attacks causes massive damage to Heracles, showing that anything Jack pulls out of his magic pouch can become a divine weapon. But wait, that was another lie, because after he tricks Heracles into a third trap, dropping a whole entire building on him, it's exposed that finally Jack's gloves are the Volunder all along, having the ability to turn anything the serial killer touches into a divine weapon powerful enough to kill a god, even Jack's own blood, which creates one last and final deception at the very end for Jack to exploit, making Heracles believe the Englishman was unarmed, only to be pierced through the heart by Jack's blood-soaked hands for the killing blow. And that's just the Spark Notes version of all the bullshit Jack manages to throw at Heracles in their fight, because there are multiple other small details and traps that Jack catches Heracles in. Honestly, this whole round of Ragnarok deserves its own deep dive and analysis that would probably be an hour long. And that's not to say it would all be about Jack's actions, because a big part of why this fight works so well is that Jack's character can only thrive up against a god like Heracles. Heracles and his gold-hearted adoration for humanity makes him a hero that any reader, or in the case of the story, audience member, god or human alike, can respect and appreciate as a character. While up against a trickster like Jack, Heracles unfortunately doesn't have much time to shine as a true warrior. His journey beginning as a young boy named Alcides, who, against all conceivable odds, stood for what he believed was right in the world, willing to protect his hometown of Thebes from Ares, god of war, and drink the ambrosia, a potion said to kill any man undeserving of ascension to godhood, reaching the heights of Mount Olympus and surviving his transformation to earn his rank amongst the heavens as a god in all but name. Despite having every legitimate reason to, especially now that Heracles can view mankind from an elevated view, the demigod has nothing but love for humanity, something that through Jack's soul eye is confirmed to be 100% truth. In spite of all of humanity's flaws, Heracles could never bring himself to hate any human, which is surprising to Jack. Jack the Ripper had forced himself to believe that no matter who they were, every single person had evil in their heart. Able to see into people's souls directly, Jack always saw, even as a young child, what was behind the masks of others. Fake empathy, pity, masquerading as care, coming to realize in death, every human shows their true colors. Yet, despite fighting his absolute hardest and never once getting an honest battle out of him, Heracles is more than willing to accept his loss at the hands of Jack. Even more surprisingly, even though Heracles is staring into the face of mankind's greatest serial killer, the demigod holds not a single shred of hate nor malice for what might be the purest representation of man's evil. Even as Heracles passes on, being erased from existence, Heracles smiles and soul shines brighter than any other person Jack has ever laid eyes on, making the serial killer admit even though Jack may have won the fight by proving Jack wrong and never changing his colors, Heracles is the true victor. As Jack walks out of the arena, pelted with tomatoes and being cursed by the very same human race he just earned another chance at survival, the serial killer knows, even if he never sees that beautiful color of a soul in anyone ever again, this illusion that he had been living for years, believing a truly good person could never exist, had finally been shattered. One of my favorite things about fight scenes is when a lot of time and energy is focused on the character's thought processes, how they play almost like a game of chess against one another. One fighter lays out a bunch of strategies and moves, while the opponent must then respond with his own tactic or plan. An intellectual back and forth between two characters whose strong suits are knowledge and the unique way they approach battle. As tournament rounds like this are where the mangaka's creativity really shines, in my opinion. In this instance, both participants in the battle have a really strong claim to victory, with Beezlebub and Nikola Tesla each being able to one-up the other multiple times over until ultimately one genius comes out alive. Out of all the fighters on humanity's side, Nikola Tesla is a character unlike any other. His dedication to the advancement of science, as well as the absolute reality-breaking experiments that his alter ego manages to create for the purposes of this fight, make Nikola's battle style unforgettable and so much fun to read. There is an old phrase that I'd like to bring up, one that tries to answer the separation of science and magic. If we were to go back in time and show men technology, they would call it magic. Vice versa, if magic was to suddenly appear in our world today, most people would attribute the magical anomaly to technology. As humanity's one and only sorcerer, Nikola Tesla's inventions are so unbelievable, one could only assume they would be made with magic, something that is captured flawlessly throughout this round of Ragnarok, with Nikola's use of his super Tesla particles to defy gravity, manipulate electricity, and at the peak of his genius, even master teleportation. Inside Nikola's domain, inside Nikola's gematria zone, a cage of electricity that creates an anti-gravity zone of super Tesla particles, a prison constructed specially for the gods themselves, Nikola himself ascends past humanity and becomes the ruler of his own domain. However, the genius would never once call himself that, merely because all Nikola does, he does for the advancement of humanity. Even from his backstory, Nikola's idolization of his brother crafted a man who would stop at nothing to ensure mankind evolved, and this charisma leaks into his personality at every turn as Nikola battles Beelzebub. However, Beelzebub has just as much of a screen presence as Nikola, especially when it comes to the sinister tone of his artwork and the powers that the devil wields against human ingenuity. Beelzebub is a god who, similar to Nikola, has a deep fascination with research and development, constantly tinkering with lower deities and demons in Helheim in order to better understand the world around him, even going as far as to plant primordial entities such as Heijin within Zerofuku simply to see what might occur from his meddling. Unlike Tesla though, Beelzebub's constant work ethic isn't done out of technological advancement or even a curiosity for the unknown. Beelzebub just wants to die. Cursed, quote unquote, by his one true love, Lilith, Beelzebub is bound to life by an emblem over his heart that activates any time he may be lethally harmed, even if it's Beelzebub himself attempting the wound. Originally a product of life, has become one of great suffering, as Beelzebub has been cursed from a young age to kill anyone he cares about once his bonds reach a certain threshold. household. Beelzebub has killed friends, even his lover Lilith, all against his own will in a fit of berserk rage, making the Lord of Flies feel the only way to atone for those deaths is, well, with his own, which makes you see the problem with the whole unable to die thing. This never-ending nightmare that Beelzebub sees as his life makes him tirelessly search for any invention or advancement in demon or god kind to potentially break Lilith's seal, so that Beelzebub can once and for all be with the ones he loves. Two extremely talented scientists, both walking the same path of ingenuity and knowledge, just for entirely different reasons, making Nikola and Beelzebub's chemistry work great as the two of them battle back and forth. The Lord of the Flies' vibration abilities complement the Prince of Hell's original incarnation well, and the way that Beelzebub tediously adapts his ability to maximize its usage, splitting offense and defense between his left and right hands respectively, show the makings of someone that has slaved endlessly over making themselves as strong as they can be. Apparently, Beelzebub's vibrations can even rival Thor's hammer, and the devil's ultimate attack, Chaos, a massive black void that takes up the whole arena and obliterates everyone within the radius, even heavily damages Beelzebub in the blast as well, fitting the exact kind of character his backstory sets him up to be. And yeah, I know Nikola gets a lot more love in the community. I just think you have to respect how much kinship Nikola attempted to share with Beelzebub, despite the Lord of Flies' obvious rejection of connection. Every interesting counterattack Beelzebub makes in response to the awesome tactics Tesla throws at him, through it all Nikola wanted was to know how Beelzebub came up with this idea, even being willing to reveal his own weaknesses in hopes Beelzebub will show his hand as well. Like I said earlier, I love when a manga isn't afraid to focus more on creativity and letting each character's unique personality shine rather than having a bunch of flashy lights and extreme choreography. And Nikola versus Beelzebub is, in my opinion, the best representation of that in the whole series. A lot of you guys might disagree with me on this top rank, especially people that had to read this exhaustingly long battle month to month. But as someone that consumes each fight in one long binge, I personally feel that every scene, piece of dialogue, power-up, and moment of tension is important to this round of Ragnarok, and I wouldn't change any part of it. My absolute favorite battle in Record of Ragnarok, and the fight that ranks #1 in this video, is Okita Soji versus Susanoo no Mikoto. What makes this fight so special is that compared to most other fighters from humanity's side, as early as round 4 of the tournament, we are made aware of Okita Soji's presence. Before his long-awaited match even occurs, the Manslayer had already come close to doing battle with Loki and the original 7 lucky gods, ready to throw hands with multiple deities at once without hesitation. So for a participant to get a lot of showcase and hype multiple chapters in advance, it does leave you wondering if they'll be able to meet the expectations they set for themselves. And I think that's what makes this fight so satisfying, because Okita delivers on every front. Outside of the fatigue that might come from waiting for one monthly piece of such a long back and forth puzzle, I can understand how this fight might have seemed never ending with how many times the momentum shifts from Okita to Susanoo. But experiencing this round of Ragnarok all in one sitting, it's one of this fight's best strong suits. Susanoo as the sword god, the deity responsible for creating the blade, but not the one responsible for creating swordsmanship, is a god that was willing to sacrifice his seat in heaven in order to learn all he could from humanity, representing all the thousands of years of history that exists inside the way of the sword. And you need look no further than Susanoo's Shinra Yaoyorozu stance, a form that at first glance appears to be a basic combat stance, but upon closer examination is actually an amalgamation of every existing sword technique ever developed across every era, age, and continent. The very reason Susanoo demands to fight Okita Soji, humanity's greatest manslayer, is because Susanoo believes there is no better opponent. Where Susanoo is a symbol for swordsmanship, Okita Soji might as well represent the antithesis of everything the sword god stands for. As the first division captain of the Shinsengumi, Okita existed during a dark era of political instability in Japan, a time where the country was stretched for protection and in dire need of warriors. A police force was put together of any man who was willing to join, regardless of how much experience with a blade they had. And despite their non-traditional origins, the Shinsengumi became infamous throughout history for their participation in multiple key events. Because of these bloody beginnings, Okita himself only understands the sword through death battles, earning his title of greatest manslayer with no proper training or tutelage, becoming the best swordsman of his era merely by cutting down every single enemy that stood in his way, whatever way he could. Now standing against the sword god is the sword demon, Okita Soji, a warrior with no stance. Part of what makes this so fun is watching Okita evolve himself time and time again in order to meet Susanoo at his power level, even exceeding what the sword god is capable of at certain moments. The Manslayer carries himself with only drive, determination, and his massive bloodlust, the three things that made Okita undefeated on the battlefield while he was alive, and only stand to make him stronger in the afterlife. Killing is the only thing that Okita knows, giving birth to this stanceless battle style that makes Okita's high-speed movements and unpredictable sword swings extremely difficult to block. Unfortunately, due to Okita having anime Chad tuberculosis, he was never able to reach his full potential in life. And due to never receiving any traditional samurai experience, the sword techniques and blade styles Okita would draw up and brainstorm were never actually humanly possible to perform, either requiring impossible acrobatics or supernatural strength to properly execute. However, now in a fully healthy peak condition, combined with a Volunder katana that won't shatter under the force of his swings, Okita is able to achieve his wildest dreams in this deathmatch, surpassing the human body multiple times over to dodge Susanoo's attacks or just barely survive critical injuries. Okita even projects his latent subconscious bloodlust, known as his quote-unquote demon ego, as an actual entity possessing Okita, transforming it into a spiritual power that can merge with Okita's body, resulting in his heart beating 3 times faster than normal and pushing his muscles past their maximum, making the Manslayer release an evil aura that gives him the actual appearance of a demon wielding a blade. Speaking of which, I haven't mentioned it much for the previous rounds, but the narrator is a big part of why a lot of these fights get hyped up and can really highlight a lot of the big impactful moments for each fighter. And in this fight, the narrator is spitting bars of extreme heat at almost every critical turn. Okita's title changing mid-battle from the demon child to the sword demon of truth every time Susanoo unveils some monumental win con or breathtaking stance, and Okita survives it by the skin of his teeth, even when the Manslayer or Susanoo crack a smile and just enjoy the battle for all of the gorgeous panel design and artwork that's in it. The narrator is on top of this fight, making sure the reader is just as locked in as our fighters. This goes for the dialogue as well, both spoken and inner monologue. Okita thinking to himself he needs to get distance from Susanoo's attack, only to cut his own thought process off mid-sentence and admit he won't make it in time, is a cool, high-stakes moment that lives rent-free in my head. And again, as a battle between tradition versus improvisation, Susanoo no Mikoto is also the greatest match and foil to Okita as a character. Despite representing the god of sword, Susanoo is not disrespected at all by Okita's battle style. In fact, it only serves to have Susanoo enjoy the deathmatch just as much as his opponent, constantly being impressed by the Manslayer and finding his development as something inspiring. And this all makes sense with Susanoo's backstory of him falling in love with swordsmanship and denying his legacy to serve under mankind, making him just as fun of a god to watch in battle, where 2 swordsmen are breaking their limits, gradually stepping their sword skills up to see just how far they can go, never knowing where this fight is gonna shift or if this last strike is the final blow, culminating in the actual finale of this fight, which achieves perfection in my eyes, as by the end, after both swordsmen have already reached their final peaks, what takes each participant over the edge is, ironically enough, accepting one another's own philosophy into their identity, as from watching Okita consistently surpass his limits and defy human nature, Susanoo is actually able to evolve himself, awakening the flawless battle stance, the ultimate perfection of swordplay, the Musoken, a conjured sword of invisible air, or as the sword god explains it, nothingness, that when dropped in one downward slash, ripples through reality and slices an opponent not outwardly, but inwardly, made apparent by Okita taking no outer wounds or cosmetic damage, but the affected area being severed completely from within, Okita's arm and leg bones coming apart as if they were never joined to begin with. Meanwhile, blessed with a body that could utilize the impossible techniques Okita's unorthodox mind concocted, all while developing a traditional fighting style of his own, the demon sword of truth Okita Soji is able to perform a combo that pierces the heavens itself and stand against a sword god that wields thousands of years of blade history. And ultimately, despite Susanoo eventually giving out due to the overuse and recoil of his Musoken technique, I feel like no other fighter for humanity fought as long and as hard for their victory as Okita Soji did. And sure, call it recency bias, a love for Okita's character above pretty much anyone else, or the fact that I just love a goddamn good sword fight. Round 10 of Ragnarok has got to be my #1 for the whole series. And that is every fight in Record of Ragnarok ranked in order from worst to best. Now, I'm sure this list is a bit different than a lot of you would have expected, so I'm excited to read all of your comments telling me what your own list looks like. Thank you so much for watching. As always, hit that like button if you forgot. It'll let me know that you want more Record of Ragnarok content and just more stuff like this in general. And I will see you all in the next one. Peace.